Consider the paradox of the modern financial consumer. We are living in the golden age of fintech. At your fingertips, you have access to algorithmic robo-advisors that can harvest tax losses in milliseconds. You can purchase fractional shares of multinational conglomerates with zero commission. You can beam digital currency across the globe using blockchain networks that operate with near zero latency. Yet, against this backdrop of supreme technological financialization, one of the fastest growing financial movements of the 2020s is fundamentally archaic. Millions of individuals are withdrawing their liquid net worth from the banking system, driving to ATMs, withdrawing physical fiat currency, and meticulously sorting paper bills into colored plastic Ziploc envelopes. They call it cash stuffing. But to dismiss this as merely a viral social media trend or a beginner's budgeting trick is to miss a profound macroeconomic and behavioral phenomenon. Why, in an era where digital transactions are engineered for frictionless perfection, are people voluntarily returning to a system utilized during the Great Depression? The answer lies in the deeply flawed architecture of human cognition when exposed to infinite, abstracted credit. Today, we are going to dissect the underlying mechanics of cash stuffing. We will explore the behavioral economics of mental accounting, the biological response to the pain of paying, and the systemic friction between institutional credit networks and household balance sheets. By the end of this analysis, you will understand exactly why digital abstraction accelerates consumer debt, and whether the antiquated act of hoarding physical cash actually outsmarts the modern credit machine, or simply subjects the user to a silent, inflationary death. To understand why envelope cash stuffing works or fails, we must first strip away the plastic binders and look at the core economic definitions at play. We are dealing with two fundamental concepts: fungibility and cognitive friction. In classical economics, money is defined by its fungibility. A dollar is a dollar. Whether that dollar exists as a ledger entry in a Chase checking account, a physical $1 bill, or a line of credit on a Visa card, its purchasing power in the immediate present is identical. Because money is fungible, standard economic theory dictates that rational actors should aggregate their capital to maximize yield and efficiency. But human beings are not perfectly rational algorithms. We are biological creatures operating on heuristics. In the 1980s, Nobel laureate Richard Thaler introduced the concept of mental accounting. Thaler proved that people do not treat money as perfectly fungible. Instead, our brains categorize funds into distinct, non-transferable mental buckets. We have a mental bucket for rent, a bucket for vacation, and a bucket for groceries. Cash stuffing is the physical manifestation of Thaler's theory. By placing $50 bills into an envelope boldly labeled groceries, the individual is artificially destroying the fungibility of that currency. If the entertainment envelope runs empty on a Friday night, the individual technically has purchasing power sitting in the groceries envelope. But crossing that physical and mental boundary feels like a violation. Cash stuffing constructs artificial firewalls within a liquid asset base. The second foundational mechanic is cognitive friction. Imagine capital flow as water in a highly engineered municipal plumbing system. Digital banking, credit cards, Apple Pay, biometric one-click purchasing is a frictionless superconductor. The tap is permanently open. The financial technology sector spends billions of dollars annually in research and development to eliminate the microseconds of hesitation between desire and purchase. Why? Because friction kills conversion rates. Every time you have to physically reach for a wallet, count out bills, and wait for change, you are experiencing friction. Cash stuffing is the deliberate installation of heavy, manual, physical valves into your financial plumbing. It operates on the premise that when wealth is abstract, spending is infinite. But when wealth is tangible, spending incurs a biological cost. This brings us to a concept known in behavioral economics as the pain of paying. Neuroimaging studies have shown that handing over physical cash activates the insula, the same region of the brain associated with physical pain and moral disgust. When you swipe a piece of plastic or double-click your smartphone, the insula remains largely dormant. The transaction is decoupled from the loss of resources. Cash stuffing forces the brain to biologically feel the expenditure of capital, turning every transaction into a localized psychological trauma. Let us look deeper into the unseen engine of this phenomenon. How does this micro-behavior interface with the macro-financial system? The modern consumer economy is deeply reliant on behavioral slippage. Institutional players, commercial banks, credit card networks, and merchant acquirers do not merely facilitate transactions. They monetize the velocity and volume of those transactions. When you use a credit card, the merchant pays an interchange fee, often between 1.5% and 3%. To fund the lavish rewards programs, cashback bonuses, and airline miles that incentivize you to use credit, the banks rely on a combination of these merchant fees and, crucially, the net interest margin generated by consumers who fail to clear their balances. The entire ecosystem is mathematically calibrated to encourage intertemporal substitution, which is a formal way of saying consuming today at the expense of tomorrow. Walk through the chronological sequence of a digital consumer. You see an item online. You use a saved credit card. The item arrives tomorrow. At no point in this sequence has your aggregate net worth visibly decreased in front of your eyes. The consequence, the depletion of capital, is deferred to a billing statement 30 days in the future. By separating the joy of acquisition from the pain of payment, the credit system exploits our natural present bias. Now, contrast this with the chronological sequence of cash stuffing. You receive your paycheck. Instead of letting it sit in a high-yield savings account or an index fund, you withdraw the entirety of your disposable income in paper fiat. You sit at a table and physically allocate this capital. You hold a stack of $20 bills. You place 3 into utilities, 5 into dining out, and 10 into rent. When you go to a restaurant, you look inside the dining out envelope. You see exactly 3 $20 bills remaining for the month. You're forced to perform real-time, zero-based accounting. If the meal costs $80, the transaction simply cannot clear. There is no overdraft. There is no margin loan. There is only a hard stop. But here is where the elite financial analyst must step in and point out the severe, invisible cost of this system. By operating entirely in physical cash, the user is subjecting themselves to 2 massive financial penalties: the loss of yield and the inflation tax. First, consider the opportunity cost. In an environment where short-term treasury bills or high-yield savings accounts are paying 4% to 5% risk-free, holding $10,000 in physical envelopes costs the user hundreds of dollars a year in lost compounding interest. Physical cash has a nominal yield of exactly 0. Second, consider the inflation tax. If the Consumer Price Index, CPI, is compounding at 3% or 4% annually, the purchasing power of the fiat currency sitting in those envelopes is actively decaying. An envelope of cash is a melting ice cube. By retreating from the financial system to gain psychological control over spending, the cash stuffer guarantees that their retained capital will lose its real value over time. Therefore, the ultimate mathematical equation of cash stuffing is an arbitrage of self-control. For this system to actually work, the amount of money saved by the psychological friction of using cash must exceed the money lost to inflation and forfeited interest. For a disciplined investor, cash stuffing is a mathematical disaster, but for a consumer trapped in a cycle of revolving credit card debt at 24% annual percentage rate, APR, the psychological tourniquet of cash stuffing provides a return on investment that far outweighs the inflation penalty. To prove that this isn't merely theoretical, we must look at the historical data and rigorous behavioral studies that validate the immense power of payment mediums. Let us examine the foundational 1998 study conducted by Drazen Prelec and Duncan Semester at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The researchers sought to isolate the exact premium that credit cards extract from human behavior. They organized a sealed bid auction for tickets to a highly sought-after professional basketball game. The participants were divided into 2 distinct groups. Group A was told they had to pay for the tickets in physical cash. Group B was told they could only pay using a credit card. The results were staggering. The average bid for the group restricted to physical cash was roughly $28. The average bid for the group utilizing credit cards was $60. The credit card group was willing to pay more than double the price for the exact same asset. This is not an anomaly, it is a feature of the system. The MIT study proved empirically that the medium of exchange fundamentally alters our valuation of capital. When the payment is abstracted into a monthly credit statement, the brain minimizes the cost. When the payment is tangible, the brain defends the capital fiercely. Now, let us zoom out to a historical macro case study, the original implementation of the envelope system during the Great Depression of the 1930s. In the 1930s, consumer credit as we know it did not exist. There were no Diners Club cards, no FICO scores, and no unsecured revolving credit lines for the working class. Capital was scarce, and bank failures had eradicated public trust in financial institutions. The envelope system was born out of sheer necessity. Households literally could not spend more than they physically possessed. The velocity of money plummeted. Fast forward to the modern catalyst for the revival of cash stuffing, the post-pandemic inflation shock of 2022 to 2024. During this period, global supply chain fractures and unprecedented M2 money supply expansion drove U.S. inflation to a 40-year high of over 9%. Real wages, meaning wages adjusted for inflation, went deeply negative. At the same time, total U.S. credit card debt eclipsed $1 trillion, and the Federal Reserve aggressively hiked interest rates, pushing the average credit card APR to record highs of over 22%. Consumers were caught in a brutal vice. The cost of living was exploding, and the cost of debt was exploding simultaneously. The digital guardrails had failed them. Budgeting apps that simply linked to their bank accounts were reduced to passive observers, merely sending push notifications after the damage was done. The resurgence of cash stuffing during this specific macroeconomic window was not a coincidence. It was a grassroots behavioral rebellion against a credit system that had become too expensive to participate in. By reverting to physical cash, consumers were replicating a corporate financial strategy known as a sinking fund, where a company restricts a portion of its own capital to ensure it is only used to pay off a specific debt, thereby eliminating managerial agency costs. Individuals were treating themselves as corporations with rogue managers, physically locking away capital to prevent their own future impulses from bankrupting the enterprise. If we zoom out to the broader global economy today, the cash stuffing movement presents a fascinating friction point. What would happen if this movement scaled? What if 50% of the population suddenly abandoned digital credit and returned to physical envelope budgeting? From a macroeconomic perspective, it would trigger a severe contraction. The modern economy relies heavily on the velocity of money, the rate at which a single unit of currency circulates through the economy. Purchasing domestically produced goods and services, credit accelerates this velocity. If a massive swath of the population reverted to cash stuffing, consumer spending would drop precipitously due to the reintroduction of the pain of paying. Credit card companies would see their transaction volumes and net interest margins collapse. The M2 money multiplier would contract as capital sits idle in plastic binders rather than being deposited in banks, which normally lend those deposits out to fund business expansion and mortgages. In short, widespread cash stuffing would induce a recessionary environment, illustrating what economists call the paradox of thrift, where individual attempts to save money collectively cause aggregate demand to fall, ultimately weakening the entire economy. So, we return to our central thesis. Does envelope cash stuffing actually work, mathematically and systemically? No. It is highly inefficient. It leaves you exposed to the corrosive decay of inflation, it sacrifices the profound wealth-building mechanics of compound interest, and it removes you from the credit scoring system necessary to acquire leverage for larger assets like real estate. But psychologically and behaviorally? Yes. It is a masterpiece of cognitive engineering. It operates on the undeniable truth that human beings are not rational spreadsheets. We are emotional, impulsive creatures easily manipulated by frictionless digital interfaces. Cash stuffing works because it trades financial optimization for behavioral compliance. It recognizes that earning a 5% yield on your savings is irrelevant if your lack of self-control leads you into 24% revolving consumer debt. In an era where the financial system is explicitly designed to make parting with your wealth as easy as a single tap on a screen, perhaps the ultimate act of financial self-defense is to introduce a little friction. Because sometimes the most sophisticated wealth preservation strategy isn't a complex algorithm. It is simply forcing yourself to feel the pain of the paper leaving your hand.